Most stories about power ask one question: can the hero defeat the villain before the villain wins? Death Note asks something completely different. What if the hero and the villain are the same person? What if the story you are watching is not about whether evil can be stopped, but about what happens when intelligence, certainty, and the complete absence of humility combine in a single human being and are given access to a tool that makes them functionally unkillable? And what if, by the time you realize the protagonist is the villain, you have already been rooting for him for 20 episodes? This is the complete story of Death Note, and we are telling it the way it was always meant to be understood, not as a cat and mouse thriller, as a tragedy about what genius costs when it is never once made to feel afraid of itself. Death Note is not really about whether Light Yagami was right or wrong. That question is too simple for what the story is actually doing. Death Note is about certainty, about what happens to a human being when they become so completely convinced of their own correctness that the mechanism which normally prevents people from doing terrible things, which is doubt, simply stops functioning. Light Yagami never doubts himself, not once across the entire series. In every moment where a different person would hesitate, reconsider, or feel the weight of what they are doing, Light simply recalculates and continues. He is the most efficient villain in anime history, specifically because his greatest weapon is not the Death Note. It is his complete immunity to the thing that makes most people humane. Follow that through the entire series, and Death Note becomes one of the most precise and devastating psychological portraits ever put on screen. Let us start at the very beginning. The notebook and the boy who found it. The world before Light picks it up. Death Note opens with a deliberate establishing shot of the human world from above, crowded, loud, filled with crime that goes unpunished, and systems that protect the powerful from accountability. It is presented without editorial comment, as a simple statement of conditions. Then we see the Shinigami realm, a barren, colorless dimension, where immortal death gods spend their endless existence gambling and sleeping because they have nothing else to do with time that never runs out. One of them, Ryuk, a Shinigami of above-average curiosity and below-average patience with boredom, drops a notebook deliberately into the human world. The notebook's rules are printed inside its first pages. If you write a name in the Death Note while picturing that person's face, they die. You can specify the cause and circumstances of death. If no cause is specified, the person dies of a heart attack in 40 seconds. The owner of the Death Note can see Ryuk. Humans who touch the notebook and then give it up lose all memories of having owned it. These rules are the story's internal machinery. Everything that follows is built on them. Light finds the notebook. Light Yagami is 17 years old when he finds the notebook on his school grounds. He is the top student in the country. He is handsome, disciplined, and respected by every adult in his life. He is deeply, privately bored. This detail is critical and almost always underplayed in discussions about the series. Light is not a person who is failed by the world, hurt by injustice, or driven to action by a specific wound. He is a person who was given everything and found it insufficient. His intelligence has no appropriate outlet in the world as it exists. Nothing challenges him. Nothing requires his full capability. He is brilliant in a context that cannot use his brilliance. The Death Note is the first thing he has ever encountered that matches his sense of scale. He tests it immediately, on a criminal being broadcast on television, a hostage situation, then on another criminal he encounters directly, to confirm the first was not coincidence, and then he sits in his room and decides to use it to remake the world. He will kill every criminal on Earth, create a world without crime, become the god of a new world cleansed of its corruption. The framing of this decision is the series' first great piece of psychological precision. Light does not experience doubt or moral hesitation during this sequence. He does not wrestle with the weight of what he is deciding. He identifies the problem, identifies his solution, and commits to it with the same efficiency he applies to exam preparation. He names himself Kira. The word is the Japanese pronunciation of the English word killer, but also sounds close to the word for light in several languages. The choice of name is not accidental. Light is building an identity, a mythology, around himself from the very first week. Ryuk's purpose. Ryuk is not a villain in the conventional sense. He is not manipulating Light toward a goal. He dropped the notebook because he was bored and wanted to see what a human would do with it. He tells Light directly on their first meeting that he will not help him, will not protect him, and will write Light's name in his own Death Note when the time comes for Light's story to end. Ryuk is the story's narrator figure in a sense, a detached observer who finds human behavior genuinely entertaining and has no investment in Light's success or failure. His presence in every scene is the story reminding you that from a perspective with enough remove, what Light is doing is fascinating rather than frightening. That remove is what makes Ryuk's eventual role at the end so devastating. L arrives. The world notices. Kira Light's killings are almost immediately noticed globally. The death rate among incarcerated criminals drops dramatically across the world. The pattern is unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Something is killing criminals at a scale and consistency that excludes coincidence. Interpol contacts LL is the world's greatest detective. He has never been seen publicly. He operates through a proxy, Watari, and communicates via a stylized capital L on a screen. He has solved every case he has taken, every single one. He is the only investigative mind on Earth considered capable of engaging with this problem, and he is also, in terms of daily functioning, the strangest human being in the series. He sits in a crouch rather than a conventional seated position, because it measurably increases his thinking capacity according to his own calculations. He eats almost exclusively sweets, described as needing sugar constantly to fuel his brain. He holds objects between his thumb and index finger with an unusual grip. He engages with social conventions with the precise mimicry of someone who has studied how they work without ever quite understanding why they exist. L is the only character in the series who matches Light's processing speed, and unlike Light, L has one quality that makes him genuinely more dangerous. He allows for uncertainty. He forms hypotheses. He says, I believe there's an 80% chance Kira is in Japan rather than I know Kira is in Japan. He holds his conclusions loosely enough to revise them when new data arrives. This is the fundamental difference between the two minds at the center of the series. Light cannot be wrong in his own internal experience. L is comfortable with not knowing yet. The first move. L makes his opening move brilliantly. He broadcasts a decoy criminal execution with a false criminal watching whether Kira kills the man on the broadcast. The decoy dies, confirming Kira can only kill people whose faces he has seen, likely through television or photographs. And the transmission location of the broadcast, which L reveals after the fact, tells him Kira is in the Kanto region of Japan. In exchange, Light learns that L exists, is engaged, and is already gathering useful data. He kills the decoy with the adjusted cause of death feature of the Death Note specifically to send a message that he knew it was a trap and killed the person anyway. Both of them simultaneously demonstrate capability, announce themselves to each other, and commit to the engagement. The game begins properly here. Joining the investigation, Light engineers his own placement on the task force investigating Kira, which is led by his own father, Soichiro Yagami. He uses the investigation access to feed L false leads and stay ahead of discoveries. L, already suspecting Light specifically, invites him directly onto the investigation team. They are now in the same room, both aware the other knows, neither able to prove it yet. The L and Light dynamic in this section of the series is one of the most precisely constructed cat and mouse sequences in all of fiction. Every conversation carries a second layer. Every question L asks has a purpose beyond its surface meaning. Every answer Light gives is calibrated to be true enough to survive scrutiny while hiding everything that would destroy him. The tennis scene, the handcuffing scene, the conversations over cake and fruit. These are not filler. They are the story showing you what it looks like when two people of genuinely extraordinary intelligence engage with each other fully while pretending to be friends. And underneath the game, something more complicated. L tells Light at one point that Light is the first person he has ever considered a friend. He means it, and Light files this information as a vulnerability to exploit when necessary. Misa and the second Death Note, the second Kira. The introduction of Misa Amane changes the structure of the story. Misa is a popular model and actress who independently received a death note from a different Shinigami named Rem. She traded half her remaining lifespan for the Shinigami eyes, the ability to see any person's real name, and remaining lifespan written above their head simply by looking at them. This makes her functionally the most useful tool Light has encountered, because she can identify anyone, including L, simply by looking at them. Misa's devotion to Light is absolute, and, in the story's most uncomfortable implication, genuine. She loves him completely and unconditionally. She has decided he is her reason for existence. She does not experience this as manipulation or delusion. It is simply what she feels. Light is aware of this and uses it without hesitation. This dynamic is the series' darkest character relationship and the one most worth examining carefully. Misa is not stupid. She is not easily fooled. She is genuinely in love with someone who regards her as a resource, and she knows enough to know she is useful to him, and she chooses it anyway. Rem, her Shinigami, understands this completely. Rem also loves Misa in the specific way Shinigami can love, which is to say with a protective investment in her survival. This sets up the story's most precise trap. The Confinement Arc L arranges to have both Light and Misa detained and placed under total surveillance. When Misa's behavior attracts enough suspicion, Light engineers his own detention alongside the investigation team to demonstrate commitment to clearing himself. Light's solution to being placed under observation while being guilty is one of the most audacious things the series produces. He erases his own memories of the Death Note voluntarily, transferring ownership to a proxy operation run by the businessman Higuchi, one of the Yotsuba group, who are using the Death Note for corporate assassination. Light without memories of the Death Note is genuinely innocent. When L tests him with the most extreme available pressure, Light's innocence is authentic because his memories are actually gone. He becomes the most genuinely helpful member of the investigation team because he has no information to hide. He is also, quietly, the best possible version of himself in this period. Light without the Death Note is warm, funny, genuinely collaborative, and brilliant in ways that serve other people rather than his own agenda. The story does not make a big deal of this observation, but it sits there in every scene, a reminder of what this person was before the notebook. Higuchi and The Reclaim. The Yotsuba arc resolves when Higuchi is caught using the Death Note, his face seen by Misa, who identifies him with the eyes. Light reclaims the notebook and his memories in a sequence that is deeply uncomfortable to watch because you see him transition in real time from the person he was without the memories back into Kira. He helps catch Higuchi. He sits beside L on the way back from the arrest. L watches him quietly, and Light, with his memories restored and his plan reactivated, reaches over and touches L's hand on the helicopter railing. It is the most unsettling moment in the series. Not violent, not loud. A hand touch. The story's way of showing you that Light has just closed the door on the person he was during the Confinement Arc and stepped back fully into being Kira. Less death, and the second act Rem's trap Light engineers L's death using a mechanism he has been building since Misa's introduction. Rem loves Misa. If Misa's life is threatened, Rem will write names in her Death Note to protect her. Writing names in a Death Note extends the Shinigami's lifespan if the deaths would have occurred naturally later, but killing someone who would not have otherwise died shortens the Shinigami's lifespan. Light constructs a scenario where the only way for Rem to save Misa is to kill both L and Watari. He does this knowing it will destroy Rem in the process, eliminating the Shinigami who has been an ongoing risk to his secret. Rem writes L's name. Watari dies first, destroying the investigative database L has spent years building. Then L, mid-sequence during the investigation, simply stops. His heart stops mid-sentence. He falls, and Light catches him, lowers him to the floor, and in L's final moments of consciousness, he looks up at Light, and both of them know exactly what has happened without saying it. There is a single tear on L's face in this scene, the only moment in the series where his emotional state breaks through completely. Light wins. The 5-year gap. The story jumps forward 4 years. Kira has effectively won the public narrative. Crime rates globally have dropped. Many people worship Kira as a divine presence. The world government has been restructured in ways that accommodate Kira's judgments. Light now works within the investigative structure that once hunted him, having essentially become the institution. This section is the story at its most uncomfortable, because the world Kira built is not simply monstrous. Crime is down. Certain kinds of suffering have genuinely decreased. Light's vision has partially worked, but the cost is an enforcement structure based entirely on fear. Anyone who opposes Kira can be killed. The definition of criminal has expanded from obvious predators to include anyone who inconveniences the project, and Light himself has become something qualitatively different from the boy who found the notebook. He has won for long enough that the performance has become the reality. He does not contain the god of the new world anymore. He is the god of the new world. Nier and Mello, two successors to L, emerge. Nier and Mello, who were raised in the same orphanage program designed to identify future L candidates. Nier is the analytical one. He reasons from evidence systematically, building his case piece by piece, like someone assembling a puzzle rather than a detective chasing intuition. He is colder, more calculating, and less personally invested than L was. Mello is emotional, reckless, brilliant in a different register. He went his own way specifically because he could not accept being second to Nier. He allies with the mafia, uses extreme methods, and takes enormous personal risks because he would rather fail loudly than succeed cautiously. Their approaches are different. Their target is the same. The endgame, Mikami, and the final notebook Light's endgame involves a proxy. He identifies and begins psychically conditioning Teru Mikami, a prosecutor who has independently developed a Kira-worshipping ideology through his own trauma history. Mikami is given a death note and operates as Light's remote execution arm. Mikami is one of the series' most precisely constructed supporting characters. He is not evil in the way Light is evil. He is broken in a very specific way. He grew up watching injustice go unpunished, and organized his entire psychological identity around the belief that someone powerful enough to enforce justice was coming. Kira is the fulfillment of Mikami's personal mythology. His devotion is religious rather than strategic. Light also identifies Kiyomi Takada, a television announcer and Light's former girlfriend, as the public face of Kira's communications. She is brilliant, composed, and more complicit in what she is doing than she allows herself to fully acknowledge. The final arc brings all threads to their conclusion simultaneously. Near tracks. Mikami. The Mikami connection leads to the Notebook. The Notebook leads to the confirmation Near has been building toward for years, the Warehouse. The final confrontation takes place in a warehouse. Light, Near's investigation team, and several of Light's allies all present. Near has replaced the pages in Mikami's death note with fakes. The plan. Mikami will write names at Light's signal. Near's team will survive because the names are written in fake pages, and Light's entire operation will be exposed. Light signals, Mikami writes, nobody dies, and Light, for the first time in the entire series, does not have an answer. The mask cracks in real time. The calculation that has never faltered for a second across 37 episodes begins to visibly break down. He reaches for contingencies that are not there. He accuses Near of cheating without being able to explain how. He appeals to the logic of his own justice, as though the quality of his argument might override the evidence in the room. Near says the thing that cuts deepest. Light is not the god of the new world. He is simply a murderer, the worst criminal of all the people he ever condemned. Light laughs. Then, he announces himself as Kira directly, which is the final break with any pretense. He activates a fragment of Death Note hidden on his wristwatch and begins to write Near's name. Matsuda, who has been on Light's father's task force since the beginning, who genuinely admired Light as a person, shoots him multiple times, breaks down crying while doing it, because Matsuda is the series' human center, and the story needed someone who loved Light as a person to be the one to shoot him. Light runs. The ending, Ryuk's final entry. Light stumbles through the warehouse, wounded, to a staircase outside. The investigation team pursues him. Ryuk descends. He tells Light, calmly and without malice, that this is the end. He was never going to write someone else's name to save Light. He was always going to write Light's name himself when the story was done, because waiting around in prison for years while Light's case worked through the courts would be boring. He writes Light Yagami in his death note. Light, in his final 40 seconds, sees visions, the beginning, his family, the person he was before he found the notebook. He reaches out, possibly toward something, possibly toward nothing. He dies on the staircase, alone. Ryuk flies away, already somewhat bored by the whole thing, to find the next interesting human. The ending of the anime differs from the manga in presentation, but not in substance. In the manga, Light dies in an abandoned industrial building, begging Ryuk not to write his name, bargaining desperately before the heart attack takes him. Both versions show the same thing. The god of the new world died the same way all the people he killed died. Heart attack. 40 seconds. Alone. The symmetry is the point. What Death Note is actually about here is the argument the series has been making all along, in every scene, through every notebook entry. Death Note is about the relationship between intelligence and humility. Intelligence without humility produces Light Yagami, a person so capable of constructing internally consistent logical frameworks that the usual feedback mechanisms, social friction, consequence, the resistance of other people's reality simply bounce off. He never experiences the kind of defeat that forces re-evaluation. Every setback becomes a puzzle he solves, which only reinforces his belief in his own infallibility. L has the same intelligence, but a different relationship to uncertainty. L says I think, I believe, I suspect, not because he is less confident, but because he understands that confidence and certainty are not the same thing. His willingness to hold his conclusions provisionally is what makes him able to revise them when the evidence changes. Light cannot do this. He cannot hold his conclusions provisionally because he has organized his entire identity around being the person who is right. The Death Note did not corrupt Light Yagami. It revealed him. It gave him a tool that matched the scale of his sense of himself, and showed us what that scale produces when it is finally given appropriate room to operate. The person who would have become a brilliant prosecutor or investigator, channeling his capabilities within appropriate limits, became Kira the moment he was handed a tool with no limits, because he had never developed the internal check that limits require. Ryuk dropping that notebook into the human world and watching a brilliant 17-year-old boy pick it up is not a story about demonic corruption. It is a story about what we allow to develop when we only teach gifted people to be right and never teach them to be uncertain. That is what makes Death Note genuinely dangerous as a piece of storytelling. Not that it glorifies Light, but that it makes you understand him completely before it lets you condemn him. Understanding is the harder thing. The legacy. Death Note changed what people expected anime could do. Before Death Note, the dominant expectation of anime in mainstream Western consciousness was action sequences and emotional arcs. Death Note demonstrated that anime could do something different. Pure psychological portrait, a story where the conflict is entirely internal and interpersonal, where the most exciting sequence in the series is two teenagers doing homework next to each other because you know what each of them knows. It introduced millions of viewers to the idea that the best anime is not always the one with the best fight animation. Sometimes it is the one that makes you genuinely uncomfortable with your own investment in a character you know you should not be rooting for. Light Yagami is the most successful villain protagonist in anime history, specifically because Oba and Obata gave you enough time inside his reasoning to build genuine sympathy before they let you see the full shape of what that reasoning produces. That is craft. Extraordinary, precise, uncomfortable craft. Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives every single day. I will see you in the next one.